From the outside, Valley View Estates looked like the epitome of suburban calm. Lush, manicured lawns sloped towards sidewalks lined with identical mailboxes. American flags fluttered on porches, while each driveway housed shiny cars that adhered to strict parking rules. Behind the curated shrubs and carefully chosen paint palettes stood an invisible network of bylaws, orchestrated by the neighborhood's powerful homeowners association. And at the heart of this HOA was Madeline Fawcett, though nearly everyone, behind her back, referred to her as Karen. Madeline, or Karen, was in her late 40s, with a penchant for immaculate beige slacks and perfectly ironed button-up shirts. She wore her hair in a rigid bob. Some joked it never moved in a windstorm, and carried herself with an air of self-declared authority. Officially, her position was Director of Community Standards, but in practice, she functioned like a one-woman code enforcement team. No detail escaped her eye, from seasonal wreaths hung off-center to unauthorized solar lights. She believed passionately in protecting property values and used that mantra to justify her every intrusion. Residents of Valley View Estates rarely dared challenge her, fearing fines or forced changes. But life in the neighborhood was about to be upended by one family's urgent need: an accessible ramp for a disabled father. Karen saw that ramp as an eyesore, something that upset her vision of uniform design. The father, who depended on the ramp to exit his home, became her newest target in a conflict that would reveal the limits of her power and the strength of community unity. At the corner of Elmwood Drive stood a modest single-story home belonging to the Gordon family: Damien, Nicole, and their 6-year-old son Logan. Damien, a 35-year-old former paramedic, had been in a serious car accident 2 years prior. The injuries to his spine left him reliant on a motorized wheelchair. Though he'd once been active and physically strong, he now navigated each day with careful planning. He still maintained a warm smile and easygoing nature, determined not to let the accident define him. The Gordons had moved to Valley View Estates from another town, seeking a quiet environment near decent schools for Logan. They'd chosen a house with a wide front porch, believing it could be adapted for Damien's mobility needs. Sure enough, with help from a disability advocacy group, they installed a wooden wheelchair ramp that sloped gently from the driveway to the porch. Painted a neutral gray to match the house trim, the ramp appeared inoffensive. But to Karen, it was a glaring disruption to the neighborhood's clean lines. Despite living in the new home for only a month, Damien and Nicole sensed tension. They caught glimpses of neighbors exchanging wary looks when they saw Damien maneuvering along the sidewalk. Some offered polite waves. Others, especially older residents loyal to the HOA, frowned or avoided eye contact. The Gordons tried not to dwell on it. They had more pressing concerns: Damien's physical therapy, Logan's new school, and day-to-day challenges like grocery runs in a wheelchair-accessible vehicle. Little did they realize, Karen had set her sights on that ramp from the moment it appeared. She believed it clashed with the uniform front stoops mandated by the HOA. And in her mind, no one, not even a disabled father, should disrupt the aesthetic harmony of Valley View Estates. On a bright Monday morning, as Nicole was helping Damien navigate down the ramp to head for a doctor's appointment, Karen appeared on the sidewalk, arms folded. Her sharply drawn eyebrows and pursed lips signaled disapproval. She made no pretense of friendliness. "Good morning," Nicole ventured politely, though a sense of foreboding tinged her voice. Karen responded with a curt nod, then turned to Damien. "Mr. Gordon, is this structure on your porch sanctioned by the HOA?" Damien frowned, adjusting the brakes on his wheelchair. "You mean the ramp?" "Yes," Karen said. "I don't recall seeing an application for architectural review. Our community has strict guidelines for any permanent fixtures, especially those altering the home's facade. You must submit a design proposal for approval. This ramp doesn't match the standard trim or color scheme we require." Nicole kept her tone steady. "We painted it gray to blend with the house, and it meets local safety codes. Also, the Fair Housing Act and ADA guidelines allow for necessary accessibility modifications." She tried to reason with Karen, though inside she felt a spark of anger. They needed this ramp for Damien to safely exit full stop. Karen sniffed. While we respect your husband's situation, Valley View Estates also upholds a consistent aesthetic. I recommend you fill out the proper form, along with a $200 fee for post-installation review. Or remove the ramp until we decide if it can remain. Remove the ramp? Damien repeated incredulously. That's not feasible. I rely on it daily. Karen gave a thin smile. I understand your frustration, but rules are rules. We can't have random constructions popping up. With that, she walked away, leaving Nicole trembling with rage. Damien sighed, shaking his head. He'd heard rumors of power-hungry HOAs, but to face it firsthand, over a wheelchair ramp, felt surreal. 2 days later, the Gordons discovered a letter in their mailbox bearing the HOA's logo. It read, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Gordon, this notice pertains to an unapproved architectural addition, a wheelchair ramp, attached to your residence. Per Section 8.3.4 of Valley View Estates Covenants, any structural modification visible from the street requires pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Failure to comply may result in fines or a mandate to remove said structure. We understand the necessity of accessibility, but must also uphold community standards. Please submit an application, enclosed, with a $200 review fee within 7 days. The committee will evaluate color, materials, and overall design continuity. Sincerely, Madeline Fawcett, Community Standards Director." Nicole's hand shook reading it. The $200 was no small sum for their tight budget, and the timeline was absurd. Damien felt a surge of helplessness. He needed the ramp to do anything outside the home, yet the HOA threatened removal. Could they truly override the Americans with Disabilities Act? Probably not legally, but it might lead to a protracted fight. Determined to keep the peace if possible, Nicole filled out the enclosed form, detailing the ramp's dimensions, color, and reason. She attached photos showing it was tastefully done, not obstructing neighbors' views. They dropped it off at the HOA office, hoping reason would prevail. Meanwhile, anxiety gnawed at them. Karen responded within days. More questions, demands for an alternative design with wood trim matching community palette, potentially expensive modifications. Their sense of dread grew. If the HOA insisted on a cost-prohibitive redesign or delayed approval, what then? They had no quick plan B. The ramp was indispensable. A week later, Karen returned, this time accompanied by 2 older board members. They marched up to the porch. Nicole answered the door, heart pounding. Damien was inside, finishing a phone call. Karen offered a tight smile. "We've reviewed your ramp application. The committee has concerns about the color and the shape. It doesn't align with our mandated 6-inch border trim. We can't approve it unless it's remodeled to match standard porch steps with partial railings, or possibly relocated to the side yard to reduce street visibility." Nicole stared. "Side yard? That's not feasible. It would triple the slope and cost thousands more. The ramp is fine as is. We painted it neutral gray, for heaven's sake." One board member coughed awkwardly. "We're sorry, but Ms. Fawcett is correct that new structures must harmonize with existing exteriors. Perhaps you can pay a contractor to restain or retrim it in the HOA's recommended style." Damien, rolling up behind Nicole, forced a polite tone. "We can't keep modifying it indefinitely. This ramp meets code and suits my wheelchair's needs. Isn't that enough? Federal law." Karen cut him off. "Mr. Gordon, we all want to accommodate you, but we must respect the community's aesthetic standards. If you refuse, the board may enforce penalties or demand removal. Let's avoid that outcome." An icy silence hung. The 2 older board members looked uneasy, possibly not wanting to appear heartless. But Karen's presence overshadowed them, pushing a rigid line. Finally, they left with the promise that if the Gordons didn't comply, official action might follow. Nicole felt tears burn. Damien clenched his fists, anger welling at how they were cornered. They had no desire to break rules, but also no money for repeated ramp modifications. A few mornings later, Nicole woke early. She stepped outside to grab the newspaper and gasped at the sight on the porch. The wheelchair ramp's side railings had been partially cut, the top edges sawed off in a jagged line. The baseboard near the entrance was hacked away, leaving the ramp unstable. Splinters littered the porch floor. Panic seized her. This looked like vandalism, a purposeful sabotage of the structure. She shouted for Damien, who wheeled out, stunned. He carefully tested the ramp. It wobbled, the missing support making it unsafe. He couldn't risk rolling down for fear of tipping. "Who did this?" he whispered, voice shaking. "We can't even leave now. I have a therapy appointment." Nicole frantically called the police, filing a vandalism report. They photographed the damage and promised an investigation, though without surveillance footage, there were no immediate leads. But the Gordons had their suspicions. Who else despised the ramp enough to physically alter it? They also noticed an envelope shoved through the mail slot containing typed pages. It read, "In order to match the standard porch trim, certain edges have been removed. You may reinforce them if you follow the correct guidelines. Thank you for your cooperation. MF." A surge of horror hit Nicole. MF obviously stood for Madeline Fawcett Karen. She'd stooped to physically cutting the ramp, endangering Damien's safety. Did she truly believe she was helping the ramp conform? Or was this a twisted power play? Regardless, it crossed every line. Damien felt trapped, literally. Without a stable ramp, he was stuck inside. A wave of helplessness weighed on him. He couldn't even exit to protest. Meanwhile, Karen had effectively robbed him of mobility. The Gordons realized it was no longer just an HOA dispute. This was a full-blown crisis. Nicole texted friends and neighbors, explaining the vandalism. Outrage flared among the more empathetic residents. They knew Karen could be harsh, but had never imagined physical sabotage. A small group formed outside the Gordons' home, conferring on how to fix or replace the ramp. They discovered the damage was extensive. New boards and railings would be needed, plus labor. The Gordons couldn't afford that easily, especially with ongoing medical bills. Sasha Jones, a neighbor who worked in construction, offered help. "I could try to patch the ramp enough for temporary use," she said. But if Karen vandalized it once, who's to say she won't do it again? The group realized a typical wooden ramp might remain a target. They needed a more foolproof solution that the HOA couldn't challenge. Something that would allow Damien safe access without giving Karen an excuse to sabotage or complain about aesthetics. Another neighbor, Marcus Reed, was part of a local charity that funded adaptive technology for disabled veterans and first responders. On hearing about Karen's ramp destruction, he said, "Let me contact some folks. If we can't keep a ramp, maybe we can do something else, like a motorized lift that blends into the porch." The concept intrigued everyone. If the lift was concealed, the HOA might have no basis for objecting, and it would bypass the visual uniformity argument. But time was pressing. Damien needed to get out for appointments and normal life. While Sasha hammered some temporary boards in place, Nicole penned a furious letter to the HOA board, demanding condemnation of Karen's vandalism. Some neighbors circulated a petition. Yet Karen remained unrepentant, apparently believing she'd improved the ramp to meet official guidelines. The Gordons felt like they were living in a surreal nightmare, pinned between legal complexities and one woman's tyranny. Within a few days, Marcus Reed returned with promising news. His charity contacts were outraged by the story of a father, once a paramedic, now disabled and victimized by an HOA official's sabotage. They were willing to cover the cost of a state-of-the-art motorized porch lift, something that could be installed discreetly and integrated with the existing steps. From the street, it would look like normal porch steps, but a hidden platform and rails would deploy at the press of a button, carrying Damien's wheelchair up or down. It was an ingenious solution. No ramp slope or railings to conflict with aesthetic guidelines. The device would be custom-fitted by professional technicians who specialized in wheelchair lifts. They'd do the job swiftly if the Gordons approved. The cost was high, thousands of dollars, but the charity believed it would be a perfect demonstration of modern accessibility engineering. Damien and Nicole felt a wave of relief and gratitude. If it worked, Karen's meddling with trim lines would be moot. The porch steps themselves wouldn't change outwardly, but a concealed platform would appear whenever needed, like a secret mechanism from a sci-fi movie. It offered more independence for Damien, no ramp to worry about. Still, they worried the HOA might try to obstruct the installation. But Marcus explained that if done carefully, the main outward look of the porch wouldn't be altered, so it might not require the same architectural approval. The device could be masked behind matching wood paneling. Once retracted, no sign of it would remain visible from the sidewalk. The Gordons decided to proceed, aided by neighbors who shared the cost of preliminary repairs so Damien could at least get in and out until the new system was ready. The charities team arrived discreetly on a Thursday evening, loaded with specialized equipment. They inspected the Gordons' porch, taking measurements and planning how to integrate a hidden track. The concept: a segment of the porch steps would fold away, revealing a sturdy platform that rose and fell along a nearly invisible guide rail. They'd have to remove part of the old damaged ramp, but that was fine. Sasha had only braced it temporarily anyway. Working late into the night, the technicians carefully installed the lift mechanism. They fitted wooden planks matching the porch's color and design so that when not in use, the steps looked entirely normal. The track and motor were hidden behind a decorative lattice, with wiring running to the Gordon's interior power supply. A small remote control or a button panel would activate the platform. The entire operation was hush-hush, kept from Karen's prying eyes. Neighbors formed a watch perimeter, politely chatting on the sidewalk to deter her from snooping. By 3 a.m., the device was fully in place. The lead technician gave a demonstration. With a software, a portion of the step folded back, revealing a flat platform. Step rails slid aside. The platform gently rose to porch level, perfectly flush for a wheelchair to roll off. Then it retracted seamlessly, leaving no trace. It was a marvel of engineering, stealth accessibility. Exhausted but thrilled, the Gordons thanked the team. They tested it, letting Damien ride up and down, a grin spreading across his face. For the first time since his accident, he felt a surge of empowerment. No more precarious wooden ramp subject to sabotage. And best of all, from the street, no meddling neighbor could claim it marred the look. Friday morning, Karen awoke early, as usual. She planned to stroll the neighborhood, checking for any fresh violations. She'd heard faint construction sounds near the Gordons' house last night, but couldn't pinpoint them. With a sense of suspicion, she marched down the sidewalk, soon stopping at the Gordons' property. She expected to see some new ramp contraption. Instead, she found a normal front porch with neatly painted steps. No sign of the old ramp. No new structure. Just quiet. Puzzled, Karen frowned. Did the Gordons give in and remove the ramp entirely? A small sense of triumph stirred. Perhaps they realized she was right about the trim lines. She approached the porch, seeing no rail or slope. Before she could knock, however, the door opened and Damien rolled out in his wheelchair through the front door. She blinked in shock. How was that possible with only porch steps? Damien pressed a button on a small remote. Or sounded. The middle portion of the steps pivoted, sliding open to reveal a platform that lowered to the driveway level. He glided down with ease. The mechanism retracted, leaving the steps pristine once more. Karen's jaw dropped. She stammered, What is that?" Damien met her gaze calmly. "It's a motorized lift. Fully ADA compliant. Doesn't alter the porch's outward appearance. My neighbors and a local charity helped install it." He tried not to sound smug, but a note of satisfaction crept through. Karen's face reddened. She sputtered about unapproved modifications, but realized the steps looked identical from the street. No bylaw specifically addressed hidden lifts. Meanwhile, the walkway and porch trim matched the house. She had no ground to claim visual disruption. Furious, she could only watch as Damien rolled away, free and unencumbered, heading to his car for the morning's errands. The story of the sabotage and stealth lift installation spread quickly among residents. Many were appalled at Karen's earlier vandalism. Cutting a disabled father's ramp was a new low, even for her. Others admired the neighbor's cunning in circumventing her petty aesthetic rules with cutting-edge technology. The local community paper ran a small piece titled "Hidden Lift Foils, HOA Hassles," praising the Gordons' resourceful solution. Karen tried to fight back. She insisted the Gordons file a formal architectural revision request for the porch steps. The Gordons, with the charity's help, submitted a thorough document. It described how the external appearance was unchanged. They cited disability rights laws, ensuring necessary modifications for safe egress. The board was forced to review it, but the mechanism was so discreet that there was no real change to the porch's outward design. Barbara Lutz, a board member, privately told the Gordons, "We can't see a reason to deny. It's basically the same steps, just with a hidden function." Seething, Karen tried to spin the narrative. They replaced a ramp with a more complicated device. How? Is that better for the neighborhood? But the rest of the board saw that the device blended perfectly. Meanwhile, neighbors who had once supported Karen's drive for uniformity were shocked by her sabotage. They distanced themselves from her extremist stance, not wanting to condone harming a disabled man's mobility. By the next HOA meeting, the board officially accepted the hidden lift as a valid solution. They even commended the Gordons for investing in a design that met both accessibility and aesthetic concerns. Karen, outmaneuvered, sat stiffly, forced to watch her power slip. Her attempt to forcibly match the trims had backfired spectacularly. The fiasco triggered a deeper reckoning in Valley View Estates. Once news broke of Karen physically cutting the ramp, many residents questioned the moral authority of an HOA that allowed one person so much unchecked power. Several openly demanded her resignation as community standards director. Karen refused, claiming she had only trimmed the ramp to comply with guidelines. A wave of neighborly activism rose. People attended HOA meetings in larger numbers, sharing stories of Karen's petty fines or intrusive inspections. Some recounted times they'd wanted to install a small accessibility feature for elderly relatives but feared her wrath. Others, who once admired the uniform look, realized such strictness had grown toxic. In this climate, a small group formed to revise the HOA's approach to accessibility. They proposed updates to the bylaws, emphasizing that no disabled resident could be forced to remove or pay for modifications essential to their mobility, provided the changes met basic safety codes. The group also pushed for mandatory board oversight so no single official, i.e., Karen, could unilaterally decide how to handle special cases. Karen fought these changes fiercely, spouting that they dilute the neighborhood's standards. But the tide had turned. The board, under pressure, voted to adopt the new language. Karen lost her veto power over design approvals related to accessibility. Freed from her micromanagement, the community began to see potential for a kinder, more inclusive environment. With each passing week, Karen felt her influence slipping. Neighbors who once nodded respectfully now avoided her or greeted her with forced smiles. She'd step onto her porch, scanning for violations, but found fewer excuses to scold. Residents learned to document any interactions to protect themselves from false claims. The local rumor mill pegged her as the ramp vandal, a label that stung even her staunchest supporters. Meanwhile, the police concluded their vandalism investigation. Without direct evidence or witnesses, they didn't file charges, but the Gordons kept a copy of the suspicious note with Karen's initials. It loomed as a moral condemnation, if not a legal one. Karen realized the next board election might see her unseated, her petty kingdom shattered. Some nights, she glimpsed from behind the blinds, watching her carefully pruned domain overshadowed by the knowledge that neighbors no longer feared her. In an attempt at damage control, Karen wrote a statement published in the HOA newsletter, claiming miscommunication led to partial ramp modifications for compliance, and that the Gordons' hidden lift solution represents a wonderful compromise. But it rang hollow. Everyone knew the sabotage was far from miscommunication. A few of Karen's older allies muttered about how the neighborhood was going soft, but most residents recognized that softness was another word for empathy. They preferred a little softness over draconian enforcement. In the end, the Gordons' experience catalyzed a shift, bridging old divides. The father in the wheelchair became a symbol of resilience, and the cunning hidden lift symbolized the triumph of neighborly solidarity over a bully's rules. Weeks later, a bright Saturday dawned. The Gordons hosted a small thank you gathering on their front porch. They invited the neighbors who helped fund or install the hidden lift, the charity reps who financed it, and those who'd offered moral support. A potluck atmosphere reigned, with kids running around, barbecue smells wafting in the breeze, and adults chatting comfortably. Damien demonstrated the porch lift for curious onlookers, rolling up and down with ease. Laughter filled the air each time the step segments separated like a secret door. People marveled at the clever design. For Damien, it was a moment of regained dignity. No ramp to be cut again, no reliance on shaky planks. He truly felt independent, stepping out of the house on his own terms. Nicole mingled, hugging neighbors and offering heartfelt thanks. She expressed deep gratitude to those who risked Karen's wrath to stand by them. Sasha recounted the tense nights patching the old ramp. Marcus described how the charity leapt at the chance to help a disabled ex-paramedic. It was a celebration of community in the truest sense, a bond formed in adversity. As the sun set, they released a few paper lanterns, symbolic of letting go of the fear and frustration. Logan, wide-eyed, squealed at their soft glow. Damien felt tears prick his eyes. Despite the HOA ordeal, they found themselves in a caring neighborhood, after all. Yes, Karen remained in her house down the street, curtains drawn. But the overshadowing gloom she cast was fading. The Gordons resolved to focus on the good. These neighbors who recognized humanity over trivial aesthetic rules. Late one evening, about a month after the porch lift unveiling, Nicole heard a timid knock at the door. She opened it to find Karen standing there, posture stiff, eyes darting anxiously. Surprised, Nicole called Damien to the door. He rolled over, bracing for a confrontation. Karen cleared her throat. I wanted to see the lift. My mother's visiting soon, and she uses a walker. She struggles with steps. Is it complicated? Stunned, they exchanged glances. Karen's expression was oddly vulnerable. No sign of the usual arrogance. She appeared uncertain, perhaps even humbled. Was she actually seeking help from the very people she'd tormented? Damien spoke gently. It's not complicated. Let me show you. He demonstrated the remote, the concealed mechanism. Karen watched, arms folded, though not in hostility this time. More like subdued curiosity. She asked a few technical questions. Nicole explained how the charity financed it. Karen nodded silently, hands trembling slightly. She mumbled, My mother's health is failing, and I realize now how crucial accessibility can be. Maybe we should have better guidelines for these modifications. Then, clearing her throat, she added in a firmer tone, though I still stand by the need for uniform aesthetics. Despite the half-baked attempt to reclaim her old stance, a trace of contrition flickered in her eyes. It was the closest she'd come to an apology. She left quickly, stiffly thanking them. While not an outright admission of guilt, it hinted that she understood, in some small measure, the importance of accessible living. Damien and Nicole shut the door, exhaling. Perhaps some small piece of compassion had taken root in Karen's mind. They didn't expect a grand epiphany, but it was a step, albeit an awkward, incomplete one. For the Gordons, it symbolized a turning point. If even Karen could see value in the technology she once fought, maybe a gentler future awaited the neighborhood. In the months that followed, Valley View Estates continued evolving. The HOA rewrote sections of its covenant to clarify that accessibility features did not require excessive design scrutiny. Instead, the board adopted a policy encouraging neighbors to work collaboratively, ensuring both function and suitable aesthetics. Karen remained on the board, but was relegated to minor tasks like organizing yard sale weekends or scheduling lawn inspections, far from her previous authoritative role. A few newly disabled or elderly residents quietly thanked the Gordons, explaining that the hidden lift precedent gave them confidence to propose their own modifications, free from Karen's intimidation. Others in the neighborhood realized not everything needed to be uniform to maintain harmony. As for Damien, he thrived. Freed from ramp sabotage, he resumed part-time work as an online paramedic consultant. His mental health improved, no longer haunted by fear that stepping outside might provoke a neighbor sabotage. Logan beamed each time his dad easily descended to take him to soccer practice or visited the grocery store together. Nicole, too, found relief. She no longer had to worry about ramp repairs or battles with the HOA. Some rumors swirled that Karen contemplated installing a smaller version of the porch lift for her mother's upcoming visit. No one confirmed if she followed through. She likely hated the irony of emulating the Gordon solution. Still, the mere possibility underscored that even the most stubborn caretaker of strict uniformity could eventually see the value of accessible design. A year passed since the lift installation. On a sunny spring afternoon, the Gordons gathered with neighbors for a casual barbecue at the community park. Children played on the swings, older folks swapped recipes, and friendly conversation flowed. The atmosphere felt warmer, more open. The specter of punitive HOA oversight had receded, replaced by a sense that rules should serve people, not the other way around. Damien, in his wheelchair, navigated easily along the park's paved paths. A few acquaintances teased him about being a local celebrity for starring in the meltdown that changed the HOA's stance on accessibility. He laughed it off, grateful the spotlight had faded. They'd accomplished what mattered, securing safe mobility for him and a more compassionate environment for everyone. At one point, Karen appeared, carefully holding a dish of potato salad. She set it on a picnic table, exchanging neutral nods with the Gordons. The tension that once crackled between them had mellowed, replaced by an uneasy truce. She didn't speak much, but she also didn't scowl or lecture about petty bylaw infractions. Perhaps, Nicole mused, even a Karen could evolve under enough pressure and empathy. As dusk settled, the families headed home. Damien and Nicole strolled behind Logan, who skipped ahead, humming a tune. On reaching their porch, Damien pressed the button. The concealed lift deployed, and he ascended smoothly. It still felt like magic. A small sign near the hidden track read, "Donated by Freedoms for First Responders Charity." He ran a hand over the text, remembering how community support had rescued them from despair. "Ready for bedtime, buddy?" Nicole called to Logan. The boy nodded, bounding inside. Damien followed, releasing the remote so the platform vanished into the steps. Their home, once a site of forced captivity, was fully accessible again. They might always have differences with the HOA, but for now, they had peace and the knowledge that neighbors united could overcome even the most rigid obstacles.